we were talking about how this passage right here is meditating on the relationship between the divine and the material and how it's possible that the two can come together. And in this first one, we noted that there is no actual contact, but we said that the contact between the spiritual and the physical is through this activity. What's the metaphor used in relationship to the dove here? See? What does the dove do? He hovers, right?
Hover.
Right, just like in the pasuk, right? Just like in the pasuk. Okay, so we said go ahead, continue.
אמר להן רבי יהושע לתלמידיו, עדיין בן זומא מבחוץ.
And I'm not sure what that meant. We said he's out thinking and we're not really sure where he is. I saw a parish elsewhere that said he's thinking about things in the wrong way. Maybe that makes sense in the context of this whole sugya, because we've already talked about the Benzoma going into the pardes and doing the wrong thing. Benzoma is the one who gets killed at the end, right? Who are the characters? Benzoma.
Ben-Azai dies.
Oh, Ben-Azai dies at the end, right? Okay, so go ahead.
But note, Professor, that he says still, he's still out. He said, like, note the still. עדיין הוא בחוץ. הוא עדיין מבחוץ.
Okay, right. So right. Okay. That may go up and indicate in relationship to what came before it. Good.
מכדי ורוח אלוהים מרחפת על פני המים, אימת הווה ביום הראשון, הבדלה ביום השני, הוא דהווה.
It's אימה הווה ביום הראשון, הבדלה ביום שני הוא דהווה. It should have been on יום שני. דכתיב, and it gets, go ahead, you continue, see?
האם מבדיל בין מים למים, וכמה אמר רב אחא בר יעקב, כמלוא נימה?
Right, so how did we translate this last time? Rabbanan Amr ki Guda de Gimla Marzutra Isema Rav Asi Amar Kitre Glimi de Parsi. What are these different translations here? Let's see. So the first one was like the thickness of a thread. We talked about this. These are different metaphors here and how we're accounting for the relationship of difference. The thickness of a thread still implies, as we all said last time, separation. The Chachamim say like the boards of a bridge, and this, we said, simultaneously indicates difference and similarity, both the separation, so you said this, and the boards themselves as bridging the gap, and then two ropes spread over one another. That we didn't really think about. And we didn't think about like two cups placed one upon another. I think that we saw that Rashi is learning both of them as similar things. So what is suggested by these metaphors that's not suggested by the ones above? I mean, we have the activity, that's the first parish, and then we have different versions of either their proximity or the ways in which they're connected. And here the metaphor is a metaphor of covering. So what's that doing? What's that metaphor of covering? Again, if the text is, as we said last time, thinking about, and we have to talk about the way in which this relates to what we've been talking about as well and what's coming, the whole idea of heresy. As we said last time, the text is thinking about the relationship between a spiritual world and a physical world. Now, for those of us who know 17th century philosophy and theology and literature, this question comes into a different kind of focus for us because we are familiar with the 17th century, and that is the modern scientific languages about talking about such things. That the whole language of spirit and matter is really developing in the 17th century. It's obviously not being used in the Gemara because the Gemara doesn't have that kind of, I will say it, clunky, abstract philosophical language. It is dealing with the same kinds of issues, but doing it poetically. Of course, what I'm saying would upset philosophers because philosophers would say, we're clunky, right? You're vague. Right? Meaning I'm accusing the philosophers of being clunky because they're stuck with these categories, because they pretty much are stuck with these categories still. But we should realize, A, that's what they're doing here, and B, they're not somehow disadvantaged because they don't have the philosophical distinctions that Descartes, Hobbes, and Spinoza have bestowed upon us. Shall I change my background while you're thinking? We did bacon yesterday, so I put up this. Can you see it now? You see the new one? But I think that would kind of be sacrilegious for this context. So let's take that. Even I feel a little weird about that, which is certainly saying something, right? And not the Parthenon. Let's just go. Let's go for my Jerusalem stone background. But that was not the point. The point was to give you time to think. So how is this covering different than the other two, the way I'm counting it, two approaches, two cups placed upon another, two robes one upon another?
The thing that I noticed about the final two metaphors is that there's a human action taking place. So they are either, you have a verb there, or spread or placed. And then they seem to develop one from the other where robes are things that they don't have any interior, cups obviously. So it seems that from the thread to the boards of the bridge to the activity of the robes to the activity of the cups, the metaphors are building up to describe. They're not. I don't even think they're just two distinctive groups. I think each one leads to the other somehow.
So this is more intimate than the cups in the, or maybe that's the wrong word. This is it's building up to a greater closeness. I'm asking you just to follow. I'm trying to follow what you're saying. It's building up. I mean, is that what you're saying? That the two robes, because they're spread upon another, and there is this activity, they're building up to a closeness.
What I thought was the interpretive idea that metaphors are active creations. So the first metaphors are ways of reading, and the second metaphors are ways of writing. They're actively engaged. That's what I meant by having spread and placed.
Did you make a chart of our discussion last time, or you didn't get around to that?
I did in my head. I didn't get. I've been working ridiculously hard, but it's in my head. So whenever
that's what my 11th grade lab partner said to our chemistry teacher when she asked for the lab report. Sorry, well, yeah. Okay, so yeah, you're going fully linguistic here, and I hear that.
Yeah.
But I think it's expressing some. I don't know. Does anybody have any other? I mean, Ed is pointing our attention to just the kinds of objects that are being described here and the activities involved in that. So that, I mean, the first one we saw also was an activity, that hovering. So here's that there's spreading and there's placing. So that's an activity. And they're also this action, these two cups placed upon one another. I guess two cups placed upon one another. This is kind of like a Dunnian conceit. Two cups placed upon one another are one cup, right? Two robes placed upon one robe are really really one robe. So right, I'm getting my mojo back because we were just starting to read Donne in my Renaissance class, right, Ronnie? So we're seeing the 17th century rabbis as aspiring metaphysical poets. Now it gets a little complicated here. So it goes on, and now we're going to deal with that acher. We're going to deal with acher. Here we go. Oh, here's this bit about. Where are we now? Oh, here's the pasuk. Al titen et picha lacheta. You shouldn't bring your body, your mouth, or your flesh to sin. So let's, it's easier for me if we do the English first, and then we'll go back to the Hebrew. Okay. Okay. So the Gemara stated earlier, so we're going back, the Gemara just signaling, we're going back to analyze this. The Gemara will very frequently do that. We'll go back and quote a piece. This is what we saw in, I guess, the Brisa. The Braita Acher chopped down the saplings. And what were the pshatim that we gave for that? What were the different perspectives? What was he doing? This is where it got complicated, right? Because Acher is, he's in a pardes, and in one sense, this is what Ed was talking about we needed the chart for. In some ways, it's going along with the metaphor of the pardes in the most literal sense. And as Ed and I were discussing this week, and I think I mentioned last time as well, there's a Gemara that says that had he learned not to be a literalist, he would not have been a heretic. And here it is interesting that they say that about him. I think his grandson says it about him. If he had not been a literalist, he would have been okay. And here in the sample, he is in this brisa, he is being a literalist. So then it goes on. With regard to him, the verse says, "Do not let your mouth bring your flesh into guilt." So we saw that a little bit. The Gemara posed a question. So what led him to heresy? And then we have a couple of stories here. Now, this one scares me a little bit. He saw the angel Metatron, who was granted permission to sit and write the merits of Israel. Okay. Anybody know who Metatron is? So no, I didn't either. But as Miltonists, Ed and C and Ronnie, it shouldn't necessarily surprise us. This is a rabbinic version of one of, I hate to be a Miltonist here, of one of the archangels. Metatron is an archangel. The thing that's a little bit difficult about learning this, Metatron appears, we'll see in a second, Safari, somebody already did all the work for us, and they have all the sources on Metatron. Metatron, I think is the way you pronounce it. He's mentioned only 4 times in the Gemara. And to me, that really is all that matters, at least at first. What comes after is a lot of Kabbalistic accretion. There's tons of Kabbalah on Metatron. And to me, that will be an impediment to understand. Knowing that will be an impediment to understanding the Gemara here. Maybe we'll look briefly at one of the other Gemaras just to find out a little bit more about him. But you see, I'm just talking methodologically why it's important to me not to go off into the Kabbalistic Never Never Land, but to stay close to the text and to stay within the languages. Why do I care about the other 4 Gemaras? Because they're contemporary, and it's the same language, and it's the same people speaking about the same person or whatever this entity is. The angel, right? We see that's a commentary. The angel Metatron, who was granted permission to sit and write the merits of Israel, he said, "There's a tradition in the world above. There is no sitting, no competition." See, I hope you're paying attention, because we're going to go back to read it in Hebrew. No turning one's back before him, and no lethargy, whatever that's going to be. Seeing that someone other than God was seated above, he said, I guess we're talking about Acher here, perhaps, heaven forbid, chaz v'chalila, perhaps there are 2 authorities, and there is another source of power and control of the world in addition to God. Such thoughts led Acher to heresy. Gemara relates further, they removed Metatron from his place in heaven and smote him with a pulsa de nahura. This is that Kabbalistic enterprise where you put a curse on somebody. Just for the history books, when the killer, the assassin of Rabin, went to a pulsa de nahura about Rabin at that time. I'm not, whatever. I was just new in Israel, and I heard it for the first time what that was. It was interesting for me to see it in the Gemara, so that others would not make the mistake that Acher made. They said to the angel, "What is the reason that when you saw Elisha ben Avuya, you did not stand before him?" Despite this conduct, Metatron was personally involved, whatever. He was granted permission to erase the merits of Acher and cause him to stumble in any manner. A divine voice went forth, saying, "Shuva, Shuva, return rebellious children." apart from Acher. Can you keep on reading the story for one more couple of lines? Upon hearing this, Elisha said, since that man, meaning himself, has been banished from that world, let him go out and enjoy this world. And Acher went astray. What is, I mean, before we look at the details, what is going on in this story? I mean, what is this story? What are the rabbis thinking about here? I see Tikva's not here and Alana's not here. So the people who are most eager to chime up without self-consciousness are not with us today. And Ben, you look a little bit too laid back today. You're looking, not too late, you just look more laid back than usual.
Even more than usual?
Even more than usual, exactly.
Yeah. Just a change of location. I'm the
Change of, oh, you have a couch. It looks more comfortable, right? And curtains.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, you're moving on up. It's good to see.
Professor, I just noticed that we're all guys here with long hair, and you are the one with short hair. So if you want to join our band, our rock and roll band.
Oh, I have to join the band now. That's a challenge. See. So let's go. Miltonist of the world unite. I mean, what is going on here in this passage? I'm not saying it's simple or straightforward, but what's being thought about here?
And the rabbis say what they cannot accept. I mean, believing.
Right. So first of all, you're in and out on the microphone. I really want to hear every single word.
I think that they say what they cannot accept.
They say. Right. So he says. Right. So he's a heretic. He says maybe they're two authorities. Right. I'm even looking at a bigger picture. Like when we have this setup of this story, and who are the characters in this story? I hate to do this, but I do it with done poems, so I'll do it with this also without even saying lahavdil, right? I mean, who are the characters here? You have God, you have Metatron, who's some kind of angel, and then you have this man, right? And you have a guy, and the guy seems to he misreads the world, he misunderstands the world in a heretical way. And I don't know, I mean, and Acher, we know also in this story, he is the paradigmatic outsider. I don't know, I'm just thinking in like Miltonic terms, in terms of angels and their functions and men in relationship to angels. Is this in any way, and maybe it's just me, is this in any way like a consideration about the nature of evil, where it comes from, especially at the end, when a divine force comes out and says, everybody come back except for Acher. Everybody else's repentance works. Everybody else is part of the system. So this Gemara now, and this is why it was so interesting to me, this is the Talmudic outsider. We don't find, the rabbis are inclusive. These are the words of the living God. Their hermeneutic is democratic. It calls out for readers. It wants more and more readers. But this guy is outside. He's beyond the pale. So and we're of course beyond the question of why does the answer to the question, why does the Gemara contain all these stories about Acher? The answer that is not the answer is that they really happened, right? We don't care if they happened. They are here representations. And we're interested in why the Gemara chooses these representations in this consideration of the outsider. So good. Maybe that was just let's look at the text as they say inside. Where are we now? Here it is. Targum Ra. Okay. So what happened? Go ahead, C. Can you just read it? I know it's hard Aramaic, but you'll do better than I
It's
will.
hard Aramaic, yeah. But let's try.
Yeah.
אל תיתן את פיך להחטיא את בשרך.
Okay, so
מה
that's
יהי
that's the
דבר-
oh, wait, so that's the pasuk from Kohelet. Okay, yeah, I think Mahi now is the question. What happened with Metatron? How did that happen?
What did you see?
What did
מה-
right?
מה-
What did Ben Zoma see? Right.
מה היא חזה? מטטרון דהתייאבה לרשותה למיטב, למכתב
You're going too fast, right? That I know. So let's go back to the Hebrew again, and the English again. What was it that? So you were right, Mahavi. He saw the angel Metatron. And he was granted permission to sit and write the merits of Israel. Okay, so we can read, at least I can follow that a little bit better now. Okay. And he was given Rashuta lemichtav zchuta d'Israel. So he was given permission.
Also, למיטב, ישיבה, יתיבה, also to sit and write. It's important to sit. But he also sits.
But I think Rashuta lemichtav means for the benefit of or to sit.
No. Yativa is yeshiva. The taf and the shin in Aramaic, the taf and the shin are interchangeable. It's lemitav is to sit and write.
To sit and write this. Very good. Okay, I understand now. To sit and write the merits of Israel.
אמר גמרא, דלמעלה לא אהב ולא ישיבה ולא תחרות ולא עורף ולא איפוי.
That's the lethargy. So how do you translate this?
Ipu is probably like ayef, ayef.
Right, they said lethargy. So, but what's the whole sentence here? See?
So it's according to their understanding, their paradigm. There is no sitting and no competition.
So Gemara here means there's a learning, there's a tradition. We know there's a learning that comes from above. There's a learning that Lamala, above, lo havi yeshiva velo tacharut velo oref. Above, there's no sitting, velo tacharut, velo competition, and no, what is oref?
Turning back. Oref is the back of your neck.
Velo ipoy, and no lethargy.
Probably the lethargy comes from because he sits. Then you think, why does an angel sit?
So so what's being, just simple in the pshat, what's being expressed here? In the heavens, lo have yeshiva lo tachar, and then there's no competition, and there's no lethargy. Shema chas v'shalom shnei rishiot hen. Okay, go ahead, keep on reading. See.
Apku is to lotzi, is to they took him out. Yeah, they removed him.
Okay.
Lemetatron, umachyu shitin is probably like 60.
Right.
Pulse denura. אמר לי, מה טעמה כי חזיתה? לא קמת מקמה.
Wait, why time? What is the reason כי חזיתה? What does that mean?
You saw and you didn't get up. לא קמת מקמה, in front of, you didn't come for him. When you...
Okay, I see. Okay, and then continue.
תייבה לרשותה לממחק זכותי דאחר.
Okay.
It was granted, like I said, granted permission to delete, to erase the merits of Acher. Yatzta bat kol v'amra.
Okay, so let's stop here now. Let's stop here. So what is it being expressed for lo havi yeshiva lo tacharut above? What does that mean? That just means above you're not allowed to sit down. There's no competition. You can't be tired. Because if you do, what would that imply? That would imply Shema Chas v'Shalom. That's the Gemara. That's what they say. The Gemara itself is interjecting. Shema Chas v'Shalom. There are two separate rishiyot. by which we mean that there's not one God, but there are two Rishiot. There are two agents who have control over different parts of the world. What Rishiot there means literally like Rashut, places for.
No, Rashut is the authority.
Okay. So that there are two authorities. So they took so that is his heresy.
Because Rasha is authorized. You are.
So that's his heresy. And what happens as a result of the heresy? They take Metatron and they punish him, and they give him the Pulse de Neura. And I saw our commentary said that it was to set an example. And what was the reason? Yeah, hold on one second. Yeah, come in.
Did you take one of these? Did I just made it?
No, I didn't. I'm actually in the class now. Hi, sorry, I'm back.
But it's funny, Professor, because first he was granted permission. He wasn't stepping out of line. It was okay. It had a permission to sit and write, and then he was punished for it.
Oh, I see. Oh, so that's what happens. He saw Metatron. Now there's a tradition. Here's something else about Metatron. I just want to show you one of the other Gemaras. The Gemara asks, if God no longer makes sport, whatever the context is, what is he now doing during the fourth? Oh, that's the second part. I feel like I'm with my undergraduate class now. Here's our Gemara. I think there's one in Avodah Zarah. That's what I thought that he brought. Or Aryan Bereshit. I'll just see if I can find it. Okay. That's not what I wanted. Kabbalistic approach we don't want. That's not the one I wanted either. You see that the Kabbalists are all over this, right? Let me just try one more thing. Or okay, I'm losing it here. Okay, let's just go back here. So I was trying to find out a little bit more about Metatron, but there are traditions that Metatron was an angel who was granted permission to write down the merits of Israel. So does this with permission. There is a tradition, I'm not sure if it's Jewish or Christian, because Metatron has an afterlife in Christian angelology as well, that he was some kind of manifestation of the soul of Enoch, right? And that he's the one who's kind of he's beamed up to God, and we don't see any further evidence of him because he's such a spiritual being. He's such a tzaddik that he's just taken up to heaven. And there is a tradition, probably in the Jewish tradition as well, I'm sure, that Metatron is a manifestation of this person. So he is granted permission to sit and write the merits of Israel, and Acher goes up and sees him and mistakes him for a deity. And Acher thinks, since there's a tradition that Acher knows, because Acher, as we know, is a Talmid Chacham, and that's a very important thing to remember about Acher. If you want to be a heretic, you have to be very learned. It's not all the people on Facebook and Twitter who think they're heretics, they're not even close. Acher is a real heretic because he's a Talmud Chacham. He knows everything. So he says there is a tradition. There's no sitting, no competition. No, you can't turn your back. There's no lethargy in heaven. So he's seeing Metatron sitting. He extrapolates from that there must be two authorities. I mean, and we can see where the Gemara, the story is telling, gives him a certain kind of justification for doing that. He misunderstands. There is this scribe. We have to go back to that and think what's doing. He gets Metatron, then gets the Pulsa Dina Ora. He gets the Pulsa Dina Ora. He's punished. And then they said to the angel, oh, now there's a different conversation. What is the reason when you saw Elisha ben Avuya that you did not stand before him? Meaning, he should have stood up. Why should he have stood up? I see two possibilities. One is that he should have stood up for him because he's a Talmud Chacham, and the other is because you should have stood up, because if you stood up, when you see a man, you should stand up, not to give the impression that you're doing something out of disrespect for the divine.
זה כמו מראית, you know that concept of מראית?
Tell me about it, Singh. What is the concept of maraita?
Maraita is like on Shabbat, you can't hang your clothes on the line outside because people might see it and think, oh, he washed he did his laundry.
Exactly. There are lots of things in halacha, especially in Hilchot Shabbos, where there are many things you can't do, which really are in and of themselves permissible. So I think that's
just how they are perceived. It's just all about how they are perceived. They are permissible, but people might mistake it.
Right. So we see that's very interesting. So, and this is true throughout halacha, that actions themselves are defined in many different ways, depending upon perception. That is, there's no action. It's almost like there's no objective activity. It depends on the context. I'm just mentioning that too, as we're reading a midrash, just to emphasize the sophistication of halacha, which deals with the same kind of assumptions about representation that we see in the midrash. In fact, you can't really understand either one without the other. I think I'm understanding the Gemara so much better now after reading midrash. Right? You see the play. And I'm not saying play in such a way as, I'm going to take apart the whole halachic system, but there's such a sense of humor to the rabbis, even in their absolutely serious and faithful commitment. But they do so with a sense of humor and a sense of irony. And that's why we should emulate them. So despite this conduct, I guess Metatron's conduct, since he was personally involved, he was granted permission to erase the merits of Acher. This is obviously, as we've been saying, a perush. And we can look at a second at it, but I don't want to just get too distracted. Let's go with this. So according to the way they're learning the story, what is the reason that when you saw Elisha ben Avuya, you did not stand up? So he's been punished, and now he's being reprimanded. Why didn't you stand up? That's part of the reprimand I get. But nonetheless, Metatron, because he was personally involved, we might have to see the Rashi here, he was granted permission to erase the merits of Acher. So so how does the story resolve here? I'm just trying to find the narrative flow here. Again, let's make believe it's a done poem. I just want to follow the basics here. Wow, there's a lot of stuff here. We did that. We did that. Okay, there's no rush here. Okay. So what do you guys say? What is the story doing here?
I'm a little confused. There's that thing that there's no sitting.
Right.
And then Acha comes across Metatron, and Metatron doesn't stand up.
Right.
So Acha is correct in thinking he's correct in thinking that something's up, and then Metatron gets blamed for it, and then Acha gets blamed for it.
Apparently, right. I mean,
and then later you realize Acha's not even called Acha unless it's because a prostitute's called him Acha. So it seems like there seems to be a window that Acha isn't entirely guilty of what he's being.
So you're giving, like, when we read Paradise Lost in book 9 and 10, we do really feel sorry for Adam and Eve because they were tempted. And this really is a kind of temptation scene. And I would say the same thing being the ultimately bottom line orthodox Miltonist that I am. I hate that term. Being the Miltonist that I am, at the end of the day, Acher should have known, right? I would have stuck with your first reading that something's up. But what's up, it doesn't necessarily lead to the idea that they're two rishiyot, two authorities. But let's continue with the way you were reading it. So first you said he gets blamed. Acher makes the mistake, and Metatron gets blamed, right? So why is that necessary in the story? Why does that happen in the story?
Metatron gets blamed because he didn't stand up, and because there's no sitting down, Acher is right to suspect something's
well.
up.
What does this figure of Metatron represent? What is he? The Gemara that I wanted to show you was something, and it was a Gemara that Metatron is this figure. God does lots of different things during the day. In fact, he spends only a quarter of the day taking care of what's happening on the world. 3/4 of his day have to do with something else. And they ask, well, who takes care of the world when God is doing other stuff? And the answer is Metatron, right? So, I mean, he's definitely in a different role here. He's in a role as a scribe, but he's given but you see the role of language for the rabbis is very, very powerful. And the role of writing here, Metatron, I'm wondering if there's a way of thinking about these two Gemaras together, the scribe figure who's punished, and this other figure, Metatron, who seems to be God's agent. You can see why Christians pick up on this, right? I mean, I have to find that Gemara for you. But in that Gemara, it seems like Metatron is the agent of God. God's busy doing other things. He's in some spiritual realm, right? Again, you see why everybody's going to pounce on Metatron, right? But and I have a friend who wrote an article on this, and he's an expert on it. But his expertise would probably not be helpful for our reading it here. I don't know what the rabbis know about Metatron or what they think about him.
Neither punishment is self-evident. Like neither punishment is self-evidently justified, right? I mean, it kind of makes me think of the part if we're thinking Milton. It brings to mind the part in Paradise Lost where Satan is laughing his ass off because the snake incurs all the punishment.
Right.
But then, of course, the other shoe drops, and all Satan and all of his followers then themselves.
Right. He does seem like this figure of evil here who's kind of taking the blame.
Yeah, but I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop in this story.
And what would the other shoe be to drop in this story?
I don't know, but I'm waiting for something comparable to that moment in Milton when it seems like the blame has been misdirected.
Oh, I see.
And then suddenly it all,
Right. I'm wondering to what extent this is helping with dealing with the problem of evil, meaning evil is now being displaced to a certain extent on the tempter, right? but only partially.
Also a parable about authority. So even if you think that there's a second authority, and even if that happens to be an angel, the truth only resides in one place, and that's with God. So
right. So I mean, it is this. It's again, you can see why the Christians like this, because or see it as a model, because it preserves the idea of the single divine, but also allows there to be a divine agent, right? I mean, and I'm sure the history of Metatron and the Christian tradition has got to be fascinating. But here, I think you're both right, though. It displaces the evil in a way. Neither one of them can take the blame for entirely. You're right. The punishment that Metatron undergoes is pretty fierce. And then at the end, he's given as a consolation. What is he allowed to do as a consolation?
Erase the merits of Acher.
Yeah, what is I guess I'm asking, what is the significance of that?
It's the opposite of what he usually does. He usually writes the merits.
Right. So what is he doing essentially? He's writing him out of life. So you see, there is a confluence between the two figures and the two Gemaras. He's got a lot of power. He's writing him out of life. I'm wondering, right? You know, if you're a modern Orthodox rabbi, would you talk about this story on Yom Kippur or Rosh Hashanah? If you're a Haredi rabbi, you're going to stay away from this one. But I wonder, right? I mean, it's a weird story because it does seem like there's the whole liturgical emphasis of the high holidays is there's one God and he is king. And in this story, you know, there's this, he's got the sidekick, Metatron, right? So Acher writes, and he's given permission, right? It's very clear. He's given permission to write him out of life, to write him out of the story. So then there's anybody have any comment, just interrupt me. Yatzda bat kol, so a bat kol, a voice, whatever this is, a bat kol, it's kind of a more derivative kind of revelation, right? It's certainly not, it's not revelation itself, it's kind of the Platonic image of revelation. Va'am reshuva banim shovavim. Even those of you who are rebellious, return. Chutz mi'acher. Does sound kind of addictive, right? So the bat kol comes out and says everybody should return. So the bat kol, it quotes a pasuk and says, and it gives us little commentary in addition, apart from Acher. Bummer, right? What's happening to Acher? I'm just wondering in the terms that we've been talking about right now. And after this, Acher himself goes to Tarbut Ra, right? Then there's the intervention of the feminine. Is it the entirely bad feminine here? He sees that he goes to a prostitute. She's not as bad as he is, right?
Not nearly as bad as he is, because she gets to name him. I mean, which is extraordinary, because he's been given this name all the way through, and then we find out at the end who's naming him, which almost, there seems to be like poor old Acher is caught up in some omniscient drama where he has no free will in it. He even gets named at the end of the story.
Wait, where does he get named?
Well, doesn't the prostitute at the end say, call it? It's the prostitute that calls him.
Oh wow, right. He is he is other, right? We have this is a cleanup job than he was, right? This parish is already giving too much, right? I mean, I hear the shot there, but this vitiates the possibility of the way Ed read it, which is certainly one of the ways it has to be read, right? So she does name him. She also names him by his name. I mean, he's also has Acher been he's never referred to as Elisha ben Avuya. No, he's not, even from the beginning of the story. For entered the Pardes. I mean, here, Ed, this is kind of interesting in terms of what you're saying. He's over-determined, as the Marxist of the 1980s would say. You can appreciate that, Ed, even though you not firsthand. The Marxist of the 1980s would say that it's over-determined for Acher. His name already determines his destiny. And in that sense, Acher he's more Greek than Hebrew, because it's the Greeks whose names are their destinies. In Hebrew, yeah.
Speaking of that, I don't know how illuminating this comparison is, but who I've been thinking about the last few minutes, remember Thersites from Iliad? When Thersites comes forward and he calls Agamemnon greedy and ridiculous. And, you know, his comments are, there's nothing about them that are very controversial.
Okay.
But then Odysseus comes forward and basically maligns his character and beats the hell out of him, and then he's banished from the camp.
Thersites is banished.
Yeah.
So Ed and I know Thersites better from Shakespeare, or at least I do, from Troilus and Cressida. And in that play, he is the figure of absolute decadence, right?
But he's not in Homer.
I understand. But he's exiled as well. He's an outsider.
Yeah, for making an error, I guess in judgment, but not one that defied logical thinking. That's why the comparison came to mind.
No, so that's interesting again, and to think about, and that's why when both you and Ed are speaking about him in kind of Greek terms, that he has really no choice. That's what I had the same feeling when I said that this Gemara is thinking about the relationship between good and evil, and necessarily in that context between good and evil and free will, and how Acher simultaneously, I mean, we would think the ideal would be, from a pure Maimonidean theological perspective, for evil and free will to exist, and with that evil not to be, I mean, I guess, and not to be, the evil not to be associated with the divine. I mean, in a way, you can see this as a kind of theodicy, that when God punishes Acher, he's got a mediator doing it. It's not him who's doing it, right? This guy who's doing Metatron, and Metatron himself is flawed. And it also comes about through this drama.
I agree with Ben in the sense that it's more the challenge. It's more the challenge to authority than the content of the challenge. That's the point in this story, or even the reason for it. Or there are literally no excuses.
Wait, but there he does. We get this, but there's a tradition, right? We have this. This is Acher's soliloquy here, right? He's thinking in his mind, right? He extrapolates from the fact that he sees him sitting there, Metatron, that there must be, I mean, I think he's not only disobeying, he's making a consideration that is actually leading him to heresy.
But if you came across an angel,
okay, now you're talking. Go ahead. Yeah.
It just seems to me on a very literal human level to be like, okay, but these are forces, that are so beyond him, and the fact that Metatron is finally actually equally is blamed, you'd expect there to be some forgiveness for the human, being so much further down the hierarchical scale. But in fact, Acher takes the whole punishment on his head, doesn't he?
Okay, let's keep. I hear that. I mean, I think there's a lot that's interesting about what you're saying, especially about. I'm trying to figure out what he did wrong in the Pardes, right? Given what his mistake was, given what you said about him, and the Gemara goes back to that, I think. So he finds a prostitute and solicits her. She says to him, "Are you not Elisha ben Avuya?" And he uproots a radish from a patch on Shabbos and gave it to her. And the prostitute names him and says he is other than he was. Okay, let's go back to that and see.
Is that sort of supposed to be bawdy? Is that midrash bawdy, the radish from a patch?
I'm not even up to that yet. Let's read it in the Hebrew. Where do we pick this up? Chutz me'acher, tafki eile libi medrasha. What does that mean?
No. The professor, go up. You're talking. I think it's a.
Oh, it's a different. That's repeated. That right. Sorry. Okay. Here we go. Right.
Is this one, yeah.
Okay, go ahead. Hoel, see, go ahead.
הואיל והטריד ההוא גברא מההוא עלמא, ליפוק ליטני והי עלמא, נפק אחר לתרבות רעה, לתרבות, it's a, the syntax.
The syntax is very hard here.
Yeah.
However, Itrid, what is that? Does anybody remember where to go all the way back down again? However, Itrid. Oh, since that man, he speaks about himself in the third person, has been banished from that world, let him go out and enjoy the world. Acher went astray. So here, let's go back here. Hol the Itrid. What was that again? Since this, pardon?
Banished.
Since this man is condemned or banishment, Mihau Alma, from this world, Lipuk, let him Lisne Bahai Alma, let him get pleasure from, let him enjoy this world. So Acher says, I've been banished from this world, so carpe diem, right? So then he goes and he finds a prostitute. Acher letabut ras. He goes into a bad culture, right? This is the nightmare for people in the Haredi world for their children, that they go to tarbut ra. Well, it's a nightmare for every parent, but tarbut ra has a very, 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 very wide definition in certain Haredi communities. Nafach eshkach zona. So he went out and he found a prostitute at Tava, and I guess he solicits her. Amrule, v'lav Elisha ben Avuya, aren't you Elisha ben Avuya? What happens in the story when she calls him by that name? What is she doing in this dramatic situation here? Akar pulga mi misra b'Shabbos. So he took up a radish from the field, mi misra b'Shabbos, v'yavla, and he gave it to her.
Amra acheru, and then she said, yeah, he must be somebody else.
I'm sorry. Amra acherhu. I see. Right. That's great. right? And you see why the translation is
The ambiguity is very acher. Is he somebody else? It must be somebody else, or he is out, or like he's acher.
well. That's what Ed was saying. The translation that we read said he is somebody else. It put that in, but that takes away, as you're saying, see, it takes away the ambiguity that's there. That is it just in passing? Oh, this is, I mean, you've changed, or is it you are now the outsider? You are the other, and it's obviously in the pashtut, in the simple meaning, you've changed. But in the real, this more significant meaning here is you are the other. You are the outsider.
I think because it's her and she's like the simplistic prostitute. It's just for
Well,
her.
she
It
comes.
was
Wait,
like,
but she comes off much better than he does, right? I mean, I don't know where you get simplistic from the story. It'd be interesting, and I'm sure somebody has already done or is doing a dissertation at Bar Ilan on prostitutes in the Talmud. It'd be fascinating to see how they're represented, I'm guessing not always badly. And here, I mean, she's a bit player, and she reminds him of his real identity. And that's when does he give her the radish? After that, she says, "Oh, you are the great Elisha ben Avuya." She didn't have to say the great. She doesn't say Rebbe, but there's one Elisha ben Avuya, and he is. And one of the things that's interesting, he is quoted in Pirkei Avot. He's quoted 2 or 3 times in the Gemara, meaning Elisha ben Avuya exists in the Gemara as Elisha ben Avuya. He still exists as a person in the Gemara. They don't excise him completely.
the fact that she recognizes his face means that he was quite famous. I don't know.
Anybody who's named in the Gemara, we consider to be famous, right? They have a certain kind of status. If they're named in the Gemara, they have a status. So what is the meaning of this activity? Before we go on to explore the sexual resonances here, which, what are they? He pulled up a radish from the field on Shabbos. Well, let's just do the pashtut first. What's wrong with this from the point of view of the legal framework that's presupposed in this midrash? God, if I had one Gemara teacher who spoke to me in this manner, I would have let like 20 years ago. It would have been good for me. So again, what I'm saying is, for me, it's very helpful to articulate in very clear terms methodologically what we're doing, and so I'm just asking, what is the halachic framework that's presupposed here? What does this activity mean within that halachic framework? I asked a very simple question in a very complicated way. What's the significance of this action? Why shouldn't he have done it? You don't
because he's a rabbi. He's supposed to follow the rules that he himself.
Well, you don't harvest. Well, right. I mean, you're not. Am I asked too easy a question? Go back. You're not allowed to harvest on Shabbos. You can't do that. You can't do katsi. You can't do katsir. What's that?
Does that not lead back to Acha making the false distinction between that world and this world? Because I've been banished from that world, he says, I can now enjoy this world.
Carpe
So
diem.
he goes to the prostitute, and the prostitute says, "Oh no, but you're of that world. You're a rabbi. Why are you behaving like this?"
Right.
And then he does a thing that he thinks is of this world, which is to pull a radish from the field. But because it's on Shabbat, it relates his action on this world back to that world.
Very, very good. Right. Very, very good. I like that. That's beautiful. I don't. That was great. Did that make sense? What Ed said, did that make sense to everybody? I like very much this idea that he benefits from this world. That's clear, right? It also, and so it's got the double meaning, Ed says. On the one hand, it shows in the dialogue that he's having, oh, carpe diem, I'll benefit from this world, but he backs into the other world, the Shabbos. The Shabbos is, right? The Gemara says, Me'ein olam haba. Shabbos is the other world. And he gives it to her. And he gives it to her on Shabbos. He gives it to her. Well, I don't know why that's important. I guess he's giving it to her. Why is that important? Why is the activity itself of just not pulling it up? I mean, that would have been bad enough. That would have shown who he is. Why is giving it to her relevant?
That's why I thought it was bawdy, because it's a crude gesture that suggests that he's already effectively sinned in a carnal way.
He's giving her the phallic radish, right? Yeah. You will not find that in the art scroll, what Ed just said, and it is so clearly, it's pshat. It's what we say in the yeshiva world. It's pshat, meaning that it's not pshat because it's poetic, but it's a very compelling way of reading this passage. Do we want to stick to our hour limit, or should we look at this interchange that's going to come up? What do we say? Should as the Clash say in their not so great album, should we stay or should we go?
Could do about 10 minutes more.
Let's read this. It gets really, the hermeneutic part comes up here. Let's just read it here. Acher asked Rabbi Meir a question after he'd gone astray. He said to him, what is the meaning of that which is written? God has made even the one as well as the other. Pasuk from Kohelet. Rabbi Meir said to him, everything that the Holy One, blessed be, he created something similar corresponding to it. He created mountains, he created hills, he created seas, he created rivers. Acher said to him, Rabbi Akiva, your teacher did not say. So you can see this is going to be really interesting. But explain the verse as follows. Everything has its opposite. He created the righteous, he created the wicked, he created the Garden of Eden, he created Gehenna, he created hell. And then it goes on, each and every person has two. Well, let's just stop there. But you see, we're not going to be able to finish this today, but let's at least see what question Rabbi Akiva, Acher asked Rabbi Meir. Okay. Shal Rabbi Meir. Oh, Shal Rabbi Meir. Acher, Shal Rabbi Meir. La Acher. So Rabbi Meir is asking.
No, Acher is asking Rabbi Meir.
How do you read this then? Shal Acher et Rabbi Meir.
Acher is Rabbi Meir.
La Acher, meaning after?
לאחר, לאחר.
Okay.
I am assuming some rabbinic playfulness here. Acher hu shal acher et Rabbi Meir la'acher sheyatza l'tarba. After he went to Tarba into a bad culture, Amar le ma'dichtiv. It's written in the pasuk. Gam et ze lumat ze. This against this. Asa Elokim. God made ze lumat ze. I see this. This gets repeated very often in secondary literature on midrashim. Amrlo kol masha bara akadosh baruch hu bara kenegdo bara harim bara gvaot bara yamim bara narot. So what does he asks him the question? What is meant by the pasuk ze lumat zu? And the answer is, who's answering here? Rabbi Meir, right? Kol masha bara kadosh baruch hu bara kenegdo. He made mountains and he made hills. He made waters, great waters, and he made streams. Amar lo Rabbi Akiva, Rabcha, your rabbi, lo markach. He didn't learn that way. He learned the pasuk differently. Ella bar tzadikim bar rashoyim bar Gan Eden bar Gehenna. That's cool. What is the argument that they are having here? What is the difference between the way Rebbe Meir learns the pasuk, Zelu Matzu, and the way Acher learns Zelu Matzu? You see, this is like a setup, right?
Maybe Acher
actually,
learns it like.
I'm sorry, just say this is like a setup. Acher wants to catch Rebbe Meir, and I think he wants to justify his heresy. So he goes to Rebbe Meir and says, "How do you learn Zelu Matzu?" Go ahead, see.
Like you said, he's trying to vindicate his decision to be a counter to counter them.
But I'm just wondering, how do you see that in the reading? Rebbe Meir gives one reading. What's the difference between the reading? How are mountains are to hills, and waters are to streams?
The differences there are symbiotic, and the differences that Acher makes are antagonistic. So Acher is saying that heresy is effectively a result of creation, because everything is antagonistic, whereas the original rabbi was saying that actually creation is symbiotic. Differences they have a justified reason, a good reason.
I hear that. I that makes a lot of sense to me. I just want to go back a step. To me, this is also Rebbe Meir is in this conversation. He knows what's happening with Acher, right? He knows that Acher is on the path to heresy. So when he learns the pasuk, he says, and he looks at somebody, Acher, who's claiming to be different, and saying Zelu Matzu is not difference that excludes you, it's difference that includes you. There's a basis of similitude. I'm using the same language Ed is using, but in a more personal way. And Acher says, no, you're wrong. Zelu Matzu doesn't have to, I'm not like you at all. We're entirely different. And not only that, I have the authority of our Rebbe Akiva. Because Rebbe Akiva will learn, and then we go on to what Ed says. Rebbe Akiva will learn, according to Acher, and that's, I don't know that's so clear, Rebbe Akiva learns that they're actually opposites. Now, if Rebbe Akiva really does learn like this, and I think that's what the continuation of the Medrash is going to be doing, is going to try to understand Acher's situation, his claim to be totally other, within the perspective of Rebbe Akiva. But that can be homework for next time. We'll think about that more next time. But just to sum up here, and we said last time we would move from maybe I just should ask the question, just as we conclude. Why are all these things being brought together? We started out with a discussion of the discussion of epistemology, of ways of knowing or knowing the infinite. And then we went on to the discussion of the ways in which the divine does somehow interact with the finite in all those metaphors. And now we go, and then we get to Metatron, who gives us, in which we have, I guess, this new introduction of evil and sin and transgression, but also a kind of definition of that metaphysical world, which affects the physical world. And now we come to this hermeneutic level. I mean, what's the relationship between all of those things? I'm not saying we have to say that there's some kind of perfect relationship between all four of them, but I guess what I'm asking, is there a common denominator to all four of them?
Sorry, can you say the four things again?
So I think the first thing was the discussion of how do you know the infinite? That's what happens at the Pardes. That's where Acher goes wrong. Then we went on to the discussion of the relationship of the divine to the finite world, and those different metaphors, the hovering, the bare thread, the cups, the robes. Then we went on to Metatron, this metaphysics, this idea of God's agent who's punished. I mean, it's a weird story, right? It's God's agent who's punished. And then after all of that, we go to Acher. And I'm just one, and Acher, but And then he goes to, we see that Acher goes to Tarbut Ra on the basis of that, and I get it. There's a narrative thread through all of it, I guess, and one can't give up on that easy answer. But I guess what I'm asking is, what is the relationship between the interpretive here and all the other things that we were looking at?
What I like about it is that one feels like led like a donkey, in the sense that, you know, by that last bit, I thought Acher was a bit hard done by. Now it seems quite clear that Acher's view of God's creation is fairly satanic, and that
How did that happen? How did that happen? How did we get to satanic?
Because antagonism is clearly, because if you have one authority, God, anything that God creates that's on purpose antagonistic blames God for evil, blames God for Satan, blames God for the other. The verse before, I was feeling very sorry for Acher being the other, because I was like, well, what choice does he have? God's created him like this. He set him up with Megatron, or whatever the Transformers guy's name is. And
we're going to do the illustrated cartoon of this one soon, right?
So I just think at the end, you have this idea that there's actually Acher was Acher from the beginning, because his view of the world is antagonistic, which sort of.
Okay. I think that's very interesting. I mean, I like the way, I like Rabbi Akiva's worldview because it coincides with my Freudian worldview, Zelu Matzu, right? That you have that antitheses come into existence in relationship to each other. Rabbi Meir seems very tame to me here, which is why it will be interesting next week to see it through and to see how I think Rabbi Meir is going to turn the tables and say, no, Rabbi Akiva wouldn't learn the way you're learning, but would learn differently. And the end of the conversation will be a way of bringing Acher, an attempt to bring him back in. And I think Ed is really right in having to look at the stories that Acher is a little bit like Marlowe's Dr. Faustus, right? That he keeps on trying to find a way out. And in a way, he is a Greek character, strangely. I've been doing the Greeks in my other class. And you really do see the way for the Greeks, character really is destiny. They have no choice. And it seems almost that Acher is in this story. He can't get out of who he is, like Faustus, right? Faustus can't do repentance. He just can't, much as he tries. Something about his character prevents him.
And Acher's villainy is very, very Elizabethan, actually. The whole thing, including the prostitute and everything, he's a very attractive Barabbas-like character, prancing about being evil and justifying it.
Very good.
I just feel like a lot of people must have read this stuff, because it's
right. So there's definitely an MLA paper there. If you ever want to, if we ever start to travel on airplanes again, and you want to, go give a paper at the Modern Language Association, that would be a killer paper, right? Acher and Elizabethan drama. But you're right. It because it's in Kabbalah, and because during the 17th century there was a desire to go back to any form of earlier knowledge, the Christians are all over Kabbalistic thinking as well, and that's probably why Metatron comes into Christian thought. I don't know, but it does. All right, people. Well, thank you very much. It's good to see you. Thanks for coming during these shorter days of December. We'll hopefully keep it up next week. Peace. See you guys.